Jesus kept on teaching in the temple. And the chief priests and the temple teachers got more and more grumpy. Eventually, they decided to have it out with Jesus. What makes you think that you can just stand there and say all this? Who said you could? Well, let me ask you a question, said Jesus. Who said John the Baptist could baptize people? Was it God? Or was it just some random? They didn't know what to say. What kind of answer was that? They knew that if they said it was God, then Jesus would know why they didn't believe John. But if they said it was a random person, then the crowds would throw a rock at them because they all believed that John was sent from God. Tough choice. So they said, "We don't know." They figured that was the best way to avoid trouble for now. "Okay," said Jesus, "well, in that case, I'm not telling you who gave me the right to do what I'm doing and say what I'm saying." He was a pretty clever guy. Jesus turned back to the crowds in the temple and he told them another story. The chief priest and temple teachers stared at each other and then back at Jesus. Their faces were super grumpy, extra puzzled, and majorly freaked out all at once. But Jesus didn't seem to mind. "There was once," he said, "a man who owned a vineyard." A vineyard is like a grape farm, where grapes get turned into wine at the end of the day. He decided to rent the vineyard out to some workers. He said they could live and work there as long as they gave some of the grapes to him. Then the man went to live a long way away. So when it was harvest time, the man sent one of his servants to collect the grapes that he was owed. But the workers were grape hogs. They didn't want to pay up, so they kicked and they punched the servant until he went away. The man who owned the vineyard, he sent another servant, but that one came back more beaten up than the last. The man sent another servant and the same thing happened again. The man who owned the vineyard eventually decided to send his own son, because surely the workers couldn't hurt him. But he was wrong. He was very wrong. The workers saw the son coming and they said to themselves, he's going to own all of this one day. So if we kill him, then we can keep it. And that's exactly what they did. What a mean story. As usual, Jesus was using that story to help the people to understand his message. After he'd finished talking to the crowds, he asked them what they thought the owner of the vineyard would do next. And what would you have done? The owner of the vineyard will go back there himself. He'll get rid of those workers and let someone else take over.
Jesus wanted the people listening to realise that the owner of the vineyard was kind of like God. And the mean workers were the people who ignore God and turn away from him. "No way, we can never let that happen," the crowd shouted at Jesus. But Jesus looked at each one of them in the eye and said, "Then why is it written so long ago, the stone the builders don't choose will become the most important stone of all? Anyone who falls over this stone will end up in a bad way. And if this stone falls on top of someone, that'll be the end for them. Stones, builders, falling? What? If you have a Bible, check out Psalm 118:22. But the important thing here is that Jesus is saying that the stone is him. He's the one people ignored, and he's the one who will become the most important of all. The chief priests and temple people knew Jesus was saying they were the ones who were rejecting him, and they didn't like it. Not only had he just managed to avoid answering their questions, now they were pretty sure he was telling stories that made them look bad. They wanted to arrest Jesus, but they were proper scared of what the crowds might do. They kept a close eye on him, looking for every opportunity they could to make him say or do something they could arrest him for. They wanted to hand him over to the Roman leaders, so they hatched a dirty, sneaky little plan. They sent some men to ask Jesus a question that would catch him out. They reckoned their plan was totally foolproof this time. Jesus, you're our teacher, they said. We know that everything you say about what God wants is true, and you always treat everyone with respect. But because Jesus is pretty epic, he already knew they were trying to trick him. So when they said, "Should we pay our taxes to Caesar or not?" he said, "Show me a coin." Caesar was what everyone called the Roman emperor at the time, so everyone had to pay their taxes to him. "Whose head is on there?" Jesus asked. "Caesar's," they said, wondering where Jesus was going with this. "Well, in that case, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." Seriously, he'd managed to get out of their trap again. They couldn't believe it. They would have to hatch a dirtier, sneakier, not so little plan.
Next, Jesus spoke to a group of people who came to him called the Sadducees. They were an interesting crowd. They didn't believe that people would come back to life after they died, which, given that Jesus had already done a bit of bringing back to life, was kind of a problem for them. So they told Jesus a really complicated story about a man who had a wife and 7 brothers, because they wanted to know what he would say. The man died, and the oldest brother married the dead man's wife so that he could look after her. But the brothers kept dying, and the woman had to marry the next oldest. Eventually, she ended up with the brother number 7, and then she died. What? That's just the way things worked back then. If a widow didn't have any children, it was the job of her husband's brothers to take care of her. They said to Jesus, "So, when this woman comes back to life again in heaven, which one of the brothers will be her husband?" "People get married here, in this world," answered Jesus. "But in God's kingdom, it doesn't work like that. No one will get married and no one will die. In heaven, the people will be like angels, and they'll all be God's children. God is the God of the living, not the dead, just like in the story of Moses. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember? You can check out the story Jesus was talking about if you have a Bible. It's in Exodus chapter 3. "That is a very good answer to the question," said the Sadducees. After that, no one else dared to ask Jesus any questions. So Jesus asked the crowds a question instead. "Why do you think people say that the Messiah will be the son of David? Even David says the Messiah is his Lord. So how can the Messiah be his son as well?" What is a Messiah? Well, you might remember, way back in chapter 1 and 2, Jesus was described as the Messiah. Essentially, the word Messiah means anointed one, someone who is marked out as being special. Jesus is talking about the same David who killed a giant with a pebble, ouch, and wrote lots of songs. You can find the songs he's thinking of in the Bible. See Psalm 110. How would you have answered Jesus' question? Jesus kept on speaking. You should be careful. These people who say they teach the ways God taught to Moses, they love to walk around in their fancy clothes. They love it when people recognize them. They always want the best seats everywhere, but actually they're liars and cheats. They pray long and wonderful prayers just to show off. These are the people God will punish in the end. Well, you wouldn't want to be one of those people then, would you? Just imagine how they'd be feeling right about now.